Now, Speaker, you have been traveling the state today.
Yes, sir.
You've been all over the place. And I know you've been talking about income taxes.
Yes, sir.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you a broader vision question. So in Mississippi, we know that we face challenges, that there are things that we've got to overcome in order for us to see the kind of success in the state that we want to see for the people of the state. There seem to be competing visions. There is one vision that basically says, hey, you know what? In order to fix problems, we need much bigger government. We need more investment by government. We need to see government have more regulation and more control of people's lives.
That's not right.
Well, I'm glad you said that.
Vision.
And then there's the other vision that says we believe in people.
We believe in freedom.
And communities that can come together. I wonder if you couldn't, I think I know based on your "that's not right" comment, but I wonder if you couldn't walk through a little bit of your guiding philosophy when it comes to thinking about your role as Speaker of the House, the leader of one of the bodies of the legislature.
Thank you. It's great to be with all of you here today. Thank you so much. I have been traveling the state. I've been to Starkville yesterday, Columbus today, to speak about the income tax proposal. I was supposed to speak at Starkville Rotary yesterday for lunch, and lo and behold, Mississippi State baseball game got rained out Sunday night, so they played yesterday during lunch. And I called the Rotary and I said, I know the temptation to leave the Mississippi State baseball game and come hear me talk about income tax is great. So I agreed to stand down and let them reschedule that event. So we get to see Mississippi State play baseball yesterday. Yes, Russ, I agree with you. I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. I believe we need less government, not more. We stand for limited government, individual freedoms. I believe the more freedom we have, the better. I don't see anybody could argue with that. And the more government you have in your life, the less freedom that you have. Government is necessary. I'm not here to argue against government. Government is necessary. The Bible talks about government. Got to have it. It serves certain functions. It serves a lot of good functions. But we don't need an intrusion of government. We don't need dependency upon the government. We need independence from the government. So those are all kind of guiding philosophies. I'll give you a silly illustration that I like, and I think makes the point. I have a son who's 29. He's married and off on his own. But there was a period of time in his life where he played minor league baseball. And if you follow baseball, you know they don't make any money. And so he would go off during the summertime. He would play minor league ball. But then in the wintertime, he had to come home and he had to live with mama and daddy because he just didn't have the ability. And we supported that. We wanted him to pursue a career in professional baseball. But he lived with us. He was dependent upon us. He was 26 years old and he's living at home with his parents. And so when the trash needed taken out, I said, take out the trash. What did he do? He took out the trash. I said, cut the grass. He cut the grass because he was dependent upon us. And the Bible even talks about whatever enslaves a person to that, whatever controls a person to that, he is enslaved. And so we controlled the purse strings for him at that period of time in his life, and he had to do what we said because he was dependent upon us. You can take that silly analogy and lay it over to government. And I don't care what it is. If you're dependent upon drugs, you're enslaved to drugs. If you're dependent upon alcohol, you're enslaved to alcohol. If you're dependent upon the government, you're enslaved to the government. And that's just a simple philosophy that kind of drives what we do at the Capitol. We want to make sure that government serves a proper role, but it's not one that creates dependency or creates control in the lives of citizens.
So this past session, you created a little bit of a stir. Mm-hmm. The stir continues. I mean, I think if you're in politics, you just create stir. That's part of it.
That's probably what we're doing.
But certainly around the elimination of the income tax, right. That's a big thing. And you get people coming out of the woodwork that have an opinion one way or the other on whether you should do it. I wonder, in the environment that we're in with COVID-19 and everything that's going on across the country, what made you wake up and say, because I know you've been thinking about this for a long time, what made you wake up and say, you know what, this is the year to do this?
Well, it is something that I felt like needs to be done for a long time, and that's in consultation with lots of economists and others. I'm active in the American Legislative Exchange Council. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what that organization is, ALEC for short. In fact, I was privileged to be their national chair last year. They talk about individual freedoms and limited government. And just looking around the country, you see those states that don't have an income tax, they seem to be prospering very well. And I know there are other factors that come into play. Don't get me wrong. Florida's got Disney World and they got beaches. We don't. But it is a factor. It may not be the sole factor, but it is a factor. And you see retirees flocking to those states because they don't have income tax. You see those states prospering. You see young millennials going to those states. And one of the factors is the income that they make is not subject to an income tax. So it's something that I've had a passion about, or belief about, I should say, for years, is that we as Mississippians would be better off if we didn't have an income tax. Putting more money, disposable income, into the pockets of our citizens is a good thing. I don't know who could argue with that. Putting money into the pockets of the citizens is a good thing. What are they going to do with it? They're going to spend it. They're going to take care of their families. They're going to improve their quality of life. They're going to take care of their children in a better fashion. Those people know how to spend their money better than the government does. And so I've just believed for a long time that eliminating the income tax makes us more economically sound. And the economists that have taken our plan and looked at it, the two Ole Miss economists, if y'all are aware of that or have seen their report, it's like a 36-page report. But the conclusion is it would result in an increase in the gross domestic product of the state of Mississippi of $371 million. Now you can look at it in the reverse, that while we have an income tax, we are losing out on gross domestic product of $371 million. But their conclusion was that if we can eliminate the income tax, then we can improve our gross domestic product by $371 million. I don't know that anyone would argue with the fact that putting money in the pockets of the citizens is a good thing. And also, in addition to that, you have the economists and policy think tanks that I have spoken with that all advise you to move away from an income. Just basic economics 101 is that a more sound and better tax structure is one that's based upon consumption versus an income tax. To the extent that you can, you want to move away from an income tax because that's a tax on productivity, and you want to move towards a consumption tax. A consumption tax is a more fair tax, and the burden of that is spread among all the taxpayers, which is more fair. Every one of us benefits from the services government provides. We all benefit from the roads and the fact that we have a prison and we have police protection and we do free schools and all the stuff that government provides. We all benefit from that. It only makes sense that everybody share in that. Right now, not everybody in the state of Mississippi pays income tax. They're not all contributing to that amount of money that is being used to provide those services. When you move away from an income tax and towards a sales tax, everybody shares in that. And all of us know people who probably operate on a cash business who are not filling out an income tax. But every one of them's buying stuff. And so when you move to that sales tax, which is what our proposal is, then it creates a more fair tax. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, you're just swapping money. You're giving me back my income tax, but you're taking it out by raising my sales tax. I respond by saying, just do the math. Let's stop and think about this. First of all, like I said, you're broadening the pool of taxpayers, so the burden is less on everyone. Secondly, you're bringing in out-of-staters, people who travel through the state of Mississippi who currently don't live here and don't pay an income tax. Now they are helping contribute to the tax burden or sharing that tax burden. But also, thirdly, think about the fact that most of what you spend your money on is not subject to a sales tax. In Mississippi, we don't tax gasoline via a sales tax. We put an excise tax on that. We don't tax medicines. Your mortgage is not subject to a tax. Your insurance is not subject to a sales tax. So many of the things that you spend your money on are not subject to the sales tax. And so you have to sit down and calculate. The statistics that we've seen, Bureau of Labor Statistics, show that you spend about a fourth of your income on stuff that's subject to the sales tax. So if you take somebody that's making $40,000 a year, then only about $10,000 of that is stuff that's subject to the sales tax. So all those things I mentioned, gasoline, medicine, mortgage, insurance, you don't pay a sales tax on that. So when we raise the sales tax, you're not being hit in all those areas where you spend money. And that is the reason why you end up with more money in your pocket. I see Gerard sitting over there, and he and I have talked, and he tells me he gets people sending him their financial information. And in every situation that we have calculated, people end up, worst case scenario is they break even. Worst case scenario is they're not hurt at all. They don't necessarily get the benefit of the income tax, but they're not hurt by it. But in most situations, people end up with more money in their pocket. And we can talk the details of it if you want to, but that's some of the philosophy behind what we're thinking.
No, I mean, I think all of that lines up with the conversations that we've had with economists, right? So we hired an economist out of Rice University who had done modeling for Wharton, and they did dynamic modeling, and he came back and he said under a couple of different scenarios, you're going to have higher gross domestic product, higher wages, and one of the really interesting things he said was that it's likely to lead to higher migration patterns, which is backed up if you look at the states that don't have income taxes. The 9 states that don't have income taxes have seen in-migration in their states double the national average in a 10-year period, while Mississippi has lost population. And so if you think about those 3 things in concert, those are certainly arguments in favor. There are also arguments against, right? And I would say that you look at it, and there really are 3 groups of detractors, if you will, that have come out as a result of the idea of eliminating the income tax. And I kind of just want to take them one by one and get your feedback.
Okay.
So I think the first group is the group that says, you know what, you are going to gut government if you eliminate the income tax. Children will die in the streets because of you, Philip Gunn. How do you respond to that?
Because of me.
You personally.
Who you been talking to?
I can name names, but then it'll end up in the paper. Jeff Pender's here.
I see Jeff sitting over there. He's scribbling away. I need to see what you put down on that pad before you write it. That's just not true. That's not true. I couldn't have passed the bill if that was true. Let me tell you why, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you may or may not realize that the threshold to pass a bill changes depending on the type of bill that it is. A lot of people don't know that in the legislature. A general bill is one that just requires a majority of those present and voting. But an appropriation bill is a majority of those elected. That's 2 different standards. And a tax bill like this is a 3/5 vote. In the House of Representatives, that's 74 votes. Anytime we change the Constitution to give away property, it's a 2/3 vote. So the threshold changes depending on the type of bill it is, because this is a 3/5 vote, a 60% vote, not a simple majority. We had to put together the votes we had to put together 74 votes in the House. And I ended up getting 90, which is phenomenal, but that's the threshold. I will tell you that there's so many legislators who are concerned about that very thing that they would not have voted for this bill had that been the case. The number one concern that was expressed to us is that whatever revenue you take out by eliminating the income tax, we've got to replace it. And so the plan that we have replaces that revenue. We've done the math, and we put together a plan that creates a budget stabilization fund. The first 6 months of this increase in the sales tax is going to go into a separate fund of about $500 million. It exists for the purpose of drawing down, it's just like a bank account. We can draw down those funds in the event we have a budget shortfall. We have a growth trigger in there. We do not phase out the income tax unless we hit particular growth triggers. And this plan is a combination of increasing sales tax and growth, and it phases out over a 12-year period of time. If we don't hit the growth trigger, we don't phase out the income tax that year. It could be a 15-year plan. If we have tremendous growth, it could be an 8-year plan. But the plan we put forward is 12 years. We have every reason to believe we'll hit the growth triggers. Growth in the state of Mississippi over the last 10 years has been 3.2%. Our trigger is 1.5%. So the first 1.5% of the growth goes back into the budget. Anything above that would be used to buy down or phase out, if you will, the income tax plan. So all those things exist for the protection. The budget stabilization fund and the growth triggers exist for the purpose of making sure that we don't lose revenue. It's a silly analogy, but when I moved to my childhood home, we lived out in the country, and we got our water from a well. When I left high school, my parents got annexed into the city, and they went on to city water. So they had the same amount of water, the source was just different. It just moved from a well to city water. That's all we're talking about here. We're going to have the same amount of money. We've taken protections to make sure that the functions of government are not compromised. And I've heard some in the education community say, oh my gosh, education is going to be cut. I couldn't pass the bill if that was the case. I couldn't compile 74 votes in the House, or actually 90 votes in the House is what I got, if that was the case. So that is a red herring. That is not true. The plan that we have replaces the revenue that we lose. It just comes from a different source. It's coming from sales tax and growth versus an income tax.
Second group of detractors kind of undercut the first group of detractors because they come out and they say, well, Philip Gunn's not actually even cutting taxes. This is not conservative enough. How do you respond to those folks?
I don't understand the question.
Sure.
What do you mean?
So there are some people who say, cut the income tax, don't try and replace it. Don't try and offset it with anything.
Oh, you're talking about just cut the tax without...
Just cut it and we'll see.
Oh, well, that doesn't work. I mean, that's a Kansas model. And all of us have seen the Kansas model, what a debacle it was. It sounds good in theory. It just doesn't work. The amount of revenue that the income tax produces in the state of Mississippi is about a third of our budget. We have a $6 billion budget. By the time you eliminate the income tax and cut the grocery tax in half, it's $1.9 billion. So there's no way you can't cut a third of your home budget, your church budget, your business budget, and survive. You just can't do it. Well, government can't either. And they couldn't in Kansas. And they did that, and they ended up raising taxes, I think, a couple of years later, like $400 million. We're not going to go there. This is not that kind of plan. We have a plan to replace the revenue. So we're not, and then some have said, let's just phase it out over like we did to 3%. Many of you may be aware that we phased out the 3% bracket 4 or 5 years ago. We did 0.5% a year over a 5-year period of time, I think, 6-year period of time. Well, if we did that, it would take to 2051 to get rid of the income tax. And that's assuming a 3% growth. If we only had 2.5% growth, it'd take to 2085. We'll all be dead. So there's no benefit there. And one of the factors here that we talked about a little bit earlier is that we're trying to retain our young people. We call it brain drain. I don't know if that's a proper term or not, but all of us know, we've seen the census numbers come back, and we've seen how our population is down in the state of Mississippi. And demographically, it's the younger people, and they are leaving. And we need to give them a reason to stay in Mississippi. One of the factors, not the only factor, I'm not promising you that if we eliminate the income tax that all the young people are going to stay. But they do think about it, and they do talk about it. I have a member in Northeast Mississippi who's in retail sales, and he told me, he said, it hinders me in recruiting talent. He said, I'm trying to recruit young people to come work for me, and they know that if they come to Mississippi, they have to pay a 5% penalty on their income. They can go to Tennessee where they don't have an income tax, and they keep more of the money in their pocket. If we got rid of the income tax, it would help me recruit talent to Mississippi. So we talked about the retirees. We also need to talk about the young folks. No young person is sitting out there saying, hey, I think I'm going to move to Mississippi because 30 years from now they're going to not have an income tax. No, that's not what they're thinking. We want real tax relief today. Under our plan, we exempt the first $40,000 of income right out of the gate. For every Mississippian, you no longer pay income tax on your first $40,000 of income. That is $1,500 that stays in your pocket per taxpayer. If it's a married couple, that's $3,000 that stays in your pocket. In 5 or 7 years, we raise that threshold to $100,000 per taxpayer, $200,000 per married couple. For a married couple, that's $9,000 that stays in their pocket. That's real money. That's real tax relief. And that's what's going to attract the young people and make them stay in Mississippi, or at least give them a reason to stay, is that, hey, they got real tax relief today, not 30 years from now. So just to say, let's phase it out over a period of time, doesn't work.
All right, third group of detractors. I'm only giving you negativity. I'm going to get to some positive stuff eventually.
Okay, great. Well,
I promise. I got about 10 minutes, 7 minutes. I can do it eventually. All right, third group of detractors are people who looked at the plan and said, yeah, all that's great, but I used to not have to pay a sales tax for my specific industry, or I used to get a really low rate relative to what everybody else pays in sales tax for my specific industry. And you guys are talking about kind of evening the playing field as a way of offsetting things. Some of those concerns are legitimate concerns because of business models, but how do you balance the people who are looking at it saying, yeah, but my industry has always been treated a certain way, and now you're talking about treating me differently, versus wanting to get a fair tax system?
Well, it depends on the industry, and we've worked on this. We've changed the model of our bill to accommodate that. Our thought in the beginning was, if we're going to ask the citizens to go up 2.5 cents on sales tax, let everybody else who pays tax go up. Well, it turns out that some industries can't pass that along to an end user. And so we've modified the bill and took them out. So farmers, loggers, manufacturers, they can't, the inputs that they have into their industry cannot be passed along to an end user. So we've removed them. So that solves that objection. Car dealers, their rate is 5%. You pay 5% sales tax on a car right now, be it new. I don't know if it's new or used. I know it may be a different rate for new and used. I'm not sure. But in any event, it goes up 2.5 cents. Now, the car dealers just thought the world was coming to an end when we raised the sales tax. People going to quit buying cars. No, let's think about this and let's do the math again. Under our plan, we exempt the first $40,000 of income. As I said, that's $1,500 that stays in your pocket that you would otherwise be giving to the state of Mississippi. But it's not just $1,500 this year. It's this year and next and next and next and next, forevermore. Now, statistics show that most people buy a car once every 7 years. It could be new or used, but they replace their vehicle about once every 7 years, on average. Some people, like you, who have a lot of money, may buy a new one every year. People like me, I buy a new truck when my old one dies. I run it till the wheels come off. And that's about once every 7 years. On average, people buy a new vehicle, a vehicle, be it new or used, once every 7 years. Now, by increasing sales tax on a car, 2.5 pennies, on a $20,000 vehicle, the increase in tax is $400. Now, I would argue that a person that's willing to pay $20,000 for a new vehicle is not going to walk away from it because they got to pay an additional $400 in tax. But if they are inclined to do so, we have given them back $1,500 this year, not only to cover the tax, but give them another $1,000 to buy a more expensive car. And that's just this year. If they're like me and they buy one every 7 years, and we've given them $1,500 a year for the next 7 years, that's $10,000. So that individual has $10,000 more dollars in his or her pocket to buy a vehicle, which is enough to cover the $400 in tax, plus buy a $9,000 more expensive vehicle. Now, on a $60,000 vehicle, the increase in tax is $1,500. So that individual now has, I would argue again, if a man's buying a $60,000 vehicle, he ain't going to walk away from it because it's a $1,500 tax. But if he is inclined to do that, he's not only got $10,000 to cover the increase in tax, he's got the money to buy a $9,000 more expensive vehicle. So when I explain that to automobile dealers, they kind of calm down, because it goes back to what we said in the very beginning. Putting more disposable income in the pockets of the citizens results in greater economic prosperity. They can buy more stuff. That's why your GDP goes up. Another benefit of this is it puts the power of the purchase in the hands of the taxpayer. You decide, to a degree, how much tax you're willing to pay. You don't want to pay the tax on a bass boat, you don't go buy the bass boat, or you buy a cheaper bass boat. In an income tax scenario, we just send you a tax bill and tell you how much you owe. Here, you get to control to a degree how much tax you pay. And you can control that by deciding what your tolerance is for taxes. And if you don't want to pay a lot of tax, then you don't buy things that would cause you to have to pay that tax. It puts the power of the purchase in the hands of the taxpayer. So in every scenario, like I said, we've calculated, we've determined that people end up with more money in their pocket. Worst case scenario is they don't get the benefit of the income tax elimination. There are some that don't currently pay an income tax, and retirees generally are in that camp. A lot of retirees are saying, I'm not paying an income tax, but you're raising my sales tax. And so I have, and Gerard and I both have walked through the scenario with those who are being willing to share their financial situation with us. And in no situation is anyone being cast into poverty. In some situations, because the grocery tax is being cut in half. You ask retired people what they spend their money on, and it's what I said earlier: medicine, gasoline, grandkids, groceries. And you sit them down and you say, okay, let's talk about the things you spend your money on. Most of that is not subject to the sales tax. So what you're generally left with is the only thing they spend their money on, which is subject to the sales tax, is groceries and grandkids. And so if you take that couple that's living on $40,000 a year and they're on that fixed income and they're worried about this, based on those labor statistics that I quoted earlier, that you spend about a fourth of what you make on stuff subject to the sales tax, that retired couple spends about $10,000 a year on stuff subject to the sales tax. That means their increase in tax is $250 a year, around $12 a month. And you say, can you absorb $12 a month? And most of them say yes. But then you say, wait a minute, we're not done, because we're cutting your grocery tax in half. How much do you spend on groceries each year? The uniform answer, which is kind of surprising to me, is $100 a week. Most retired couples tell me we spend $100 a week on groceries. Well, if you do the math on that, times 52 weeks, it's $364 a year they're paying in tax. We're cutting that in half. So on the one hand, they may be going up $250 on sales tax, but we're giving them back $182 for a net loss of $70 a year, less than $10 a month. Then you say, are you willing to absorb that? And they say yes. And then you say, but wait a minute, you can give that gift. You said you spend your money on groceries and grandkids. What better gift can you give your grandkids than to eliminate the income tax for them? Imagine how much money you would have, any of us would have, if when we started our careers, we didn't have to pay an income tax to the state of Mississippi. I've been practicing law for 32 years. I don't know how much money I have sent to the state of Mississippi over those 32 years, but if I had that money back and on a mutual fund somewhere, and gave Gerard control over it so he could grow it for me, then there's no telling how much money I'd have today. You can give that gift to your grandkids today if you're willing to do this. And every one of them say, absolutely, I'm willing to do that. So those are just some of the benefits of why we ought to do this.
So I want to sort of summarize the bill, and then I want to ask you a question about it.
Okay.
So essentially what we're talking about is we got $1.9 billion a year in income taxes the state takes in. We're going to cut 1.3 of it, basically first year, and we're going to offset that with sales tax adjustments.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then the other $600 million is a cut that gets funded by growth over 1.5%. So any growth that occurs over 1.5% funds a $600 million cut. Is that an accurate summary of the bill?
Phases it out over a period of 10 or 12 years, yeah.
Okay. So here's the question. Politics is the art of the possible, right? You've already talked about some of the compromises. People brought information to you. You made changes to the bill. There are some people who have looked at conversations around the income tax and the elimination of the income tax and thought, well, that's great campaign fodder, but this is not something that can happen. How do you respond to those people? Because one, I think it's something that can happen, and two, I think it could have a profoundly positive impact on the state. But what's your response?
The only way this can happen is if the people decide they want this. You, the people, are going to have to get behind it. We brought this out of the House. We worked hard. Our former law partner, Trey Dellinger, who's over here somewhere in the dark, He's a genius. He's the smartest man in the room, by the way. And people laugh when I say that. And I say, well, he majored in nuclear physics. Any of y'all do that? So if you can't beat nuclear physics, then he is the smartest man in the room. But this was the result of hours and hours of work, consultation with the Department of Revenue, putting the numbers together. It was complicated to put together, but it's not complicated to understand. And so we are listening to those who have concerns, and we're trying to address those concerns. This very morning, when I was in Columbus, I met with a bunch of manufacturers who had concerns about some of the credits that they get as businesses that we've used to attract them on the income tax, personal income tax that they get. So I talked to them about that. We're going to work on that. But the guts of the bill are solid. It's been out there for 3 months. A lot of economists have looked at it. A lot of policymakers have looked at it. And no one's really been able to tell me why, from a policy standpoint, it's a bad bill. I've had political statements given. I've had self-serving statements given, but from a policy standpoint, no one's been able to poke a hole in it. I don't know if I mentioned Art Laffer or not. Art Laffer, Ronald Reagan's economic advisor, has blessed the plan. Steve Moore, Donald Trump's economic advisor, has blessed the plan. The Democratic leader of the House of Representatives stood with us at the press conference and said he could not find a weakness in the plan. One of the benefits there is the fact that it gives tax relief to the poorest of the poor first, which is unusual because usually it's a top-down kind of thing. The people who are making $40,000 or less, they are the ones that immediately benefited. They no longer have to pay an income tax. That's 50% of the people of the state of Mississippi. And when we raise that threshold to $100,000, that's 83% of the people of the state of Mississippi. And then when we phase it out altogether, that's everybody in the state of Mississippi. There's a day coming when we no longer have an income tax. That can only be a positive thing. It can only result in economic prosperity for the state of Mississippi. But we've got to get the legislature on board. And I can't go down there and do that. The people in the legislature have got to hear from their constituents. It's the grassroots effort. I told the people this morning when I was speaking to them in Columbus, I said, I'm here to preach the gospel of income tax elimination, to make converts, and then make disciples. So that's what I'm here today. I've preached the gospel of why it's a good thing. I hope I've made some converts in this room, and now you need to go out as disciples and spread the word and get your legislators on board. Everything in the legislature operates on votes. You got to have votes. I don't care how great and grand and wonderful your idea is. We can't pass Mother's Day if we don't have the votes. So I got to have the votes. You need to talk to your legislators and tell them you support this. You want to see them make it happen. That's the only way this is going to happen. Grassroots effort.
Nobody would vote against Mama, though. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Not.
You might have one or two that just like to vote no. Well, look, I appreciate the time that you've given us today. We have talked about a lot of big ideas throughout the day, ways to move Mississippi forward. And I think it is vitally important, whether you agree with eliminating the income tax or you agree with the individual proposals that have been discussed, it is vitally important that we recognize that boldness is needed to move Mississippi forward. And so I want to give you what is the first of these awards that we're going to give out this afternoon.
It's like a Dundee Award or something?
This is like a kiss of death. But it is the first time we've done Rise Awards. And I want to give you the first one, not only because of the boldness around the income tax. There are arguments to be made there, and I appreciate the arguments you've made today. But boldness on occupational licensing reform, boldness on expanding access to health care, just across the board this year, being willing to stand up for criminal justice reform because it was the right thing to do. You've shown real leadership, and so we appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
And wanted to present you with this now smudged up piece of glass
Got your fingerprints
that have my
all
fingerprints all over it. But thank you for what you've done.
Very kind of you. I appreciate that very much. You're very kind.